It's time for A's Gaming Horrorthon.
So next up in this year's Gaming Horrorthon is the underwater sci-fi thriller, Soma. What I admired most about Soma wasn't the gameplay or the graphics or anything like that, although the sound effects were pretty damn impressive. In fact, apparently over 2,000 different recordings were made of footsteps alone to make this game, but I digress. No, what I admired most about Soma was its story, and that's something that's not often said about a horror game. Not only was it unique and thought-provoking, it kept you engaged right through the 10 or so hours that the game lasted for. And yeah, I did kind of see the ending coming from a mile off, but it was still a satisfying conclusion. But don't worry though, I'm not going to spoil anything here if you haven't played it yet. The game did a great job of introducing players to some moral dilemmas. It gave you choices on topics such as artificial intelligence, cloning, and even euthanasia. You see, the game took place in an underwater research facility in the year 2103. The place had gone completely to ruin with virtually no human survivors left, but there were plenty of robots. Now these robots acted very suspiciously human. That was because, in a way, they were. They were being run by exact copies of past crew members' brains. And the worst thing was, they didn't even know that they were copies. They still believed that they were human. So when it came to killing them off, you had to remember, you were also killing off the last remains of a person's consciousness. Does a human have to have a body in order to be considered alive?
Yeah. Could you maybe hit that switch over there so we could get moving?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Anyway, let's take a step back a sec and discuss the story. You played as Simon, a guy who was in a car accident and had a problem with his brain. So he needed to see a specialist, you would presume a doctor.
Dr. Munchie?
Well, it's just Mr. Munchie, but I'm working on it.
Okay, not a doctor. Anyway, after taking a seat, something soon went wrong.
Did something go wrong?
Simon then awoke to find himself in the future, at the bottom of the sea, with no idea how he got there. Wow, good work, Mr. Munchie. Now this facility, called Paphos 2, was very reminiscent of places like the space station from Alien Isolation, or the Ishimura from Dead Space. It was high tech and yet wasn't exactly clean and shiny. It was more like an old ship's engine room kind of feel, and you imagine that even before the shit hit the fan, this wasn't exactly the nicest place to live. By exploring what remained of the facility, you could slowly piece together a whole bunch of stories relating to the last few weeks that the place was normal. In fact, by touching dead robots or corpses, you would access their last memories and hear a bit of detail about how they died. There are a lot of cases of famous last words.
Everything from the barracks to the comm center. If anyone ever sets their foot here again, they're gonna have a hell of a time getting around.
And as well as this, there were a ton of emails and letters to pick up, giving you some clues as to how this facility ultimately met its demise. It wasn't jump scares that made this game scary, it was the atmosphere and a constant sense of dread. One thing that was kinda weird was that on the radio, the other characters' faces were all represented by cartoons rather than real looking people. This seemed a really weird design choice, considering how everything else in the game felt so authentic. Anyway, from the outset you were made well aware that you were not alone down there. As you crawled through the air vents, again just like Alien, you could feel the tension build as the game teased you as to the reveal of its enemies. There weren't too many encounters throughout the game, but at least most of them did provide a unique type of enemy. There was a mix. You had your things that looked like a fusion of Big Daddy from Bioshock and a barnacle. You had a strange floaty underwater thing. You had a telepathic monster which you couldn't look at. You couldn't fight these creatures, no, instead it was all about the stealth. You'd have to sneak around, peek around corners, and create distractions by lobbing something. Yeah, this was a type of game where almost every single item that you saw could be picked up and dropped. Simon was a messy bastard. The enemies were pretty forgiving and a lot could just be sprinted past without them even knowing what was going on. If you were caught, then you weren't immediately killed and instead just got knocked out. 2 or 3 knockouts in a row and eventually you would finally die. So in conclusion, Soma was a game that progressed at a nice pace, constantly switching between indoors and outdoor underwater exploration. While the stealth and gameplay mechanics may not have been anything special on their own, the settings, the story, and the constant hopeless, grim tone made this a horror game to remember. As the famous sci-fi writer Philip K. Dick once said, reality is that which, when you stop believing in it, doesn't go away. If you enjoyed this video, then click here to subscribe to A's Gaming Moments, and as always, thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.